Hi, my name is Turner Simmons. Today is November 19th, 2019. This is my Unit 2 uh, Case Connections video assignment. And for my case connections, the first one I chose was Case 3, which involves a 5-year-old boy who was brought to the pediatrician's office for an annual visit. The mother reports he has been a sickly infant and often appears drowsy. She also has concerns over her son's persistent thirst and frequent urination. Blood samples are taken for insulin measurements at time 0 and 1 hour after a glucose loading test. The results of this test are illustrated in the table below. And so what the table below shows is that the serum insulin levels of the patient baseline are just under or just over 5 points below the control, which is 6, and the patient is 0.8, so it is well below. And then an hour after a glucose load, the patient's insulin level is at a 5, where the control is anywhere from 40 plus or minus 11. So it's still well below what it should be. And so the first question is, what is this information likely to suggest about the underlying biochemical basis for the patient's symptoms? Now, in my opinion, due to the low baseline insulin as well as the low insulin after the glucose load, it is apparent to me that the 5-year-old has a major problem in producing insulin, which can be an indicator of type 1 diabetes. Now, the frequent urination and the persistent thirst that the patient is experiencing pretty much confirms that this is type 1 diabetes, as in type 1 diabetes, the buildup of glucose in the bloodstream becomes too much for the kidneys, so it then gets excreted out along with a lot of fluids from the tissues, which causes dehydration and leads to thirst in the patient. Now, the next question is, what would you predict the patient's fasted blood glucose levels to be given his current condition? Uh, Above the normal range, within the normal range, or below the normal range? I would say that the patient could expect his blood glucose levels to be above the normal uh, at a fasting. During the fast, I would expect his blood glucose levels to be higher than the normal range because a lack of insulin in the body makes the body unable to store glycogen, and it then becomes overflowed in the bloodstream. So if they tested his blood, they would find more glucose in it than the average person. And the next question is, list 2 regulatory enzymes that are likely to be active in this individual's current condition. So this individual is uh, hyperglycemic right now. He has a lot more glucose in his bloodstream than what he should have because he's type 1 diabetic and is not taking insulin. So in a type 1 diabetic, since they have that lack of insulin, gluconeogenesis is very prevalent in the body because insulin is kind of an inhibitor of that mechanism in that pathway. So I would expect the regulatory enzymes, glucose 6 phosphatase as well as fructose 1,6 biphosphatase to be very active as there is no inhibitor for them to turn off because of the lack of insulin in the body. Now, the second case study that I chose was case study 4, where a previously healthy 2-month-old female presents with jittery spells several hours after breastfeeding. Her mother reports that she has not given the baby anything to eat other than breast milk since birth. The baby has only recently been sleeping for more than 2 hours between feedings, and that's when the mother reports these symptoms. The lab results are consistent with low blood sugar, but are otherwise unremarkable. Epinephrine is administered and there is no increase in blood sugar, but there is an increase in blood lactate. A physical exam reveals an enlarged liver, and blood glucose levels increase after breastfeeding, but the infant cannot maintain blood glucose levels within a normal range while they are fasting. So, based on the information above, which of the following is most likely the diagnosis of this patient? Is it A, hereditary fructose intolerance, B, galactosemia, C, glycogen storage disease, or D, glucose 6 phosphate dehydrogenase deficiency? So, just to kind of get a refresher of what the patient's symptoms are, they're going through jittery spells, they have a low blood sugar. When they were administered epinephrine, it did not cause an increase in blood sugar, which typically it should. Epinephrine causes uh, glycogen to be released into the bloodstream. Uh, they can't maintain their own blood sugar after while they're fasting, and their liver is enlarged. So those are the patient's symptoms. Now I'm just going to go through and run down the options, the four options that they gave, and the symptoms that present with each one of those four options, and kind of show you why the one I think it is matches up the best. So the first option they gave was hereditary fructose intolerance, and I do not believe that this would be the patient's diagnosis because in hereditary fructose intolerance, the patient is irritable, they have jaundice, the yellowing of their eyes, or pale skin, they are vomiting, have convulsions, and an enlarged liver. So the only one that shows some overlap here is the enlarged liver, but the patient wasn't vomiting, they're not experiencing convulsions, they just have little jitters, and there was no reportable jaundice in the patient. So I wouldn't assume that it's hereditary fructose intolerance. Moving on to the second option, galactosemia. Patients with galactosemia would experience a loss of appetite, jaundice, vomiting, and convulsions again. Again, there's no even enlarged liver here. The infant continues to eat the breast milk, so there's no loss of appetite. We don't see jaundice, we don't see vomiting, and we don't see convulsions, so I would mark this one off the list as well. Next, we have glycogen storage disease. Uh, Common symptoms are low blood sugar, an enlarged liver, and when epinephrine is administered, it causes no increase in their blood glucose. Uh, Now, this option kind of lines up perfectly with the symptoms that the patient is experiencing, so I would have to say that I would diagnose this patient with glycogen storage disease. And finally, just to go over why the glucose 6 phosphate dehydrogenase deficiency is not the correct uh, diagnosis either, is because patients with G6PD deficiency experience jaundice, a rapid heart rate, they have a fever, uh, they're often very sluggish and fatigued and have dark urine. And the only thing that kind of overlaps there is the fatigue, where the infant is napping after having the breast milk. But again, there's no rapid heart rate, there's no fever, there's no dark urine, and there's no jaundice. So I'd have to rule this one out as well. And I would say that the patient is experiencing glycogen storage disease. Uh, that wraps it up for this case study. Thanks for bearing with me through that, and take care.